Hi, Archie.
Hi.
How are you today? Book eating boy, AKA.
Good.
All right. Well, this is part 2 of yesterday. So yesterday we were talking about how to look at a question and figure out if we need the answer to use the past tense of the verb or the present tense of the verb. And it can be kind of tricky in a question to figure that out because there are two kinds of questions. There are questions that begin with a question word, like who, what, when, where, why, how. And we also saw one with which. And then there can be questions that have a yes, no answer. And we also learned that the verb is kind of plays by different rules. That's sort of a super verb. That can be all by itself in a question. Most of the other verbs need a helper in order to make a question. So we will often see in a question a 2-word verb. But when we do the answer, we will only need 1 word. We add the second word, the helper, to make the question. And a lot of times when we are making that question, we are going to take the 2 parts of the verb and put them around the subject so that the subject, instead of being the first word of a question, kind of gets stuck in the middle, sandwiched in between the 2 parts of the verb. So let me make sure here that you're still with us because I don't see you. So are you still with us?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Yesterday, we looked at questions that began with how, why, what is, what did, and what is. And then we ended by looking at which storm is. So I wanted to talk for just a minute about the question who. I said yesterday that the question who is a little bit tricky. So when I'm writing a question that begins with who, I could say, who is making lunch? Okay, so I could have who, and then I'm going to make my verb green, and then I'm going to say making lunch. So this is in this question, the answer is going to be the subject. It's going to actually replace the word who. So up here in this question, this word who can be a pronoun, and which means it can take the place of a noun, which means it can be the subject of a sentence. And so we don't usually, like I know in Chinese, you write your question the same way as your answer. You just put at the end, ma, and then that turns it into a question. But in English, we often switch the order of the subject and verb in the question. So in the question, instead of saying subject, verb, object, we might say verb part 1, subject, verb part 2, and then the object. But with who is making lunch, who is kind of the subject of this sentence, but it's an unknown person. And it's taking the place of whoever the answer is here. So here's our answer. And so we're going to have this person is making lunch. So this question, who is making lunch, is an example of a question where the word order is going to be exactly the same in the question and in the answer. And so we could say, for example, mom could be our who, and then we just say is making lunch. So it depends on what we're asking, because we could say, instead of saying who is making lunch, we could say who is the teacher. And here, the answer, we're looking for the name of this person. And so the name of this person is going to come and be the subject, right? So we could say Miss, I don't know, Miss Jean is the teacher. So, however, the other way to say that, which I actually meant to do, you could do it that way. You could say Miss Jean is the teacher, but the other way to do that would be to say the teacher is Miss Jean. And actually, the reason that you can write it both ways, Miss Jean is the teacher and the teacher is Miss Jean, is because this side of is and this side of is are exactly the same. And in this type of sentence, is kind of like an equal sign. And it's just saying whoever's on this side is the same person as who's on this side. So we could switch these and say Miss Jean is the teacher, or the teacher is Miss Jean, because it's kind of like if we use equals in a math. You know, if I say 2 plus 2 equals 4, could I also say that 4 equals 2 plus 2, right? Both of those are the same. So when we have an equals sign, both sides of it, it doesn't matter what side they're on. And the word is, that's that superverb. It can do many different things. It can also be like an equal sign. And we could say, okay, whoever is here is the same thing as here, and we can switch those. So we could say the teacher is Miss Jean, or Miss Jean is the teacher. So with questions that have who, we're looking for the name of a person. And we're basically saying, you know, we can put the name of the person before the equal sign or after the equal sign, before the is or after the is. So there's kind of two ways to answer that. This one, though, would be harder. Mom is making lunch, right? The only other way to say that would be the person who is making lunch is mom. And that's a lot of words to say the same thing. So it's easier just to say mom is making lunch. But what I wanted to point out with who questions is we might just have one verb and not the two-part verb. We don't need the helping verb, because who can be the subject in the question, right? I could say who made lunch, right? So if I say who made lunch, are you still there, Archie?
Yes,
How come I can't see you today?
because I don't want to put the camera on today.
Why not?
Because I don't want.
Well, the answer to who is going to be the subject of the sentence. And this is pretty easy because we're just going to, everything else is going to be the same. We're just replacing who with the person. And notice that the verb is made. We did not have to add a helping verb. When we're adding a helping verb, you saw that we did that with how do you feel? So do, feel is the verb. Why do we need? So do, need is the verb. What did the mother make? Did, make is the verb. What did the neighbors trade? Did, trade is the verb. But for all of these, if you look at the answer is subject, verb, object, or subject, verb, adjective. Subject, verb, well, this is a longer one because why questions are going to have because. Subject, verb, subject, verb. So a lot of questions will end. A question is either going to be answered in a way where we put the answer at the end of the sentence or at the beginning of the sentence. So remember, every answer has to have a subject and a verb. So sometimes we're going to get the subject and the verb right from the question, and then we put the answer right here. And if we put the answer right there on the yellow line, it's probably either going to be an object, like a thing, especially an answer to a what question will often be an object or a thing, or it could be an adjective, like how do you feel? So then we want a describing word, but we get our subject and our verb right from the question. We find it, and then we put our answer over here. But sometimes the answer to the question is going to become the subject. And so we get the verb and this part from the question, and we can just copy it from the question. And then the answer, the part that we're answering, is going to go at the beginning of the sentence. I think what we found yesterday is that everything that followed this pattern, where we were putting the answer here, unless it used the verb is, everything else, like traded, made, had a two-part verb in the question. But then in the answer, we only needed a one-part verb. So we looked at the first part to help us know past tense or present tense, and then we looked at the second part, the action part, to give us the verb. And the subject was often in between the two-part verb in the question. We could just pull it out. And then our answer went here. But some questions, like which one, like which, what was it? Which storm is the deadliest? Or a who question? We're probably going to be putting our answer right here at the beginning. And then we can copy the rest right from the question. I think this kind of answer, we will find that the question might have only had one word for the verb. So that's what I'm going to say about looking hard at the question to figure out, should I answer this with the present tense or the past tense? So I'm just going to go through 1 to 7 quickly, and we're going to move to the second page. So for number 1, how do you feel? This is the important part because the question is just asking, how do you feel? So the subject is you. So how is a question word? The subject is you. Feel is the action verb, but we need to have a helping verb to turn it into a question. So we use do. So do is part 1 of the verb, and feel is part 2 of the verb. This is the part we will use in the answer. We look at do to help us know present tense or past tense. So this is present tense. So we're going to answer a you question with I. So we say, I feel blank, an adjective to describe how we feel. Number 2 is a why question. So why is a question word. And then we is the subject. So we'll be using we to answer. And then our main verb is need. But to make this a question, we need to have a helping verb. So do is part 1. That's the helping verb. Need is part 2. That's the verb we will use in our answer. So we will say we need, because do is present tense. So we do not need to turn this into needed. We'll say need. We need blah, blah, blah. Now remember, this is a why question. So we're going to say we need, and then we can copy, 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 copy. And then we're going to say because, and then we have our reason. Okay. Now this one, we looked at this one a lot. Remember the apostrophe S is sneaky because it's the word is, and that is the verb, and it's the only verb. And it can be a verb all by itself because is like a super verb. So this is a what question. So here's our question word. Now, the subject is this whole thing inside the pink box. Okay, that all works together to be the thing we're talking about in our answer. Okay, so actually this word thing is like the subject, but we want more information about what thing. So we're saying my favorite thing to do in class. And so we put that whole thing here in the blue circle to be the subject of the answer. And we have to remember to change your to my, just like we change you to I. If I say, how are you? You say, I am fine. So my favorite thing to do in class, and then comes the verb, which will be the same one as this one, hiding right here with the apostrophe. But remember, the second part is why. There's a different question here. And they added the answer to both questions into one sentence because they said, because blank. So my favorite thing to do in class is blah, 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 because blah, blah, blah. Okay. In this one, now remember, if we see something with a comma after it, just like we did right here, we can kind of cover it up. I mean, it gives us some important information, but it's not part of the question. It's usually telling us when something is or where something is. So this is telling us where is this question taking place. It's taking place in the story called Ugly Vegetables. But we're going to get rid of that for a minute. So it says what. So this is our question word. And then our subject is the mother. The main verb is make. But to turn it into a question, we need to have a helping verb. So did is part 1, make is part 2. So our subject, our answer is going to be the mother, and then our verb is make, but we have to look at part 1 here to see present tense or past tense. This is past tense, and so this will be made. The mother made. And then comes the answer. What did she make? And then this part with their vegetables was just copy, 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 copy. A lot of times the words in the answer, we can just copy from the question. Okay, number 5. What is the question word? Our subject is neighbors. The main verb is trade. So we need a helping verb, which is did. So part 1, part 2. So our answer will begin with the subject, the neighbors. Then comes our main verb, our action verb, trade. But we have to decide, do we want trade or do we want traded? We go look at part 1 here, did, that's past tense. So we want trade to be past tense, traded. Now this is a what question, so we need a thing to come next. Okay, the neighbors traded what? Something here. For the soup, copy, copy, copy. Okay, right from the question. What is a blizzard? Well, this is an is question. So is does not need a helping verb, right? We don't say what did blizzard is. We don't have to do that with the verb is. So we just have what is a blizzard. Blizzard is. So we just take the blizzard, we move it to the front to be our subject, and we use the same verb is. You know, this is a little similar to the question of who is the teacher? The teacher is. So kind of like who is blank? Blank is. So with this kind of question, a blizzard is a storm. The is kind of like an equal sign. And what we have on this side is the same thing as what we have on this side. Okay, so let's move our thing here because that's a comma, right? According to the story. So that just means this question takes place when, or what do we need to know in order to answer this question, or where are we going to find the answer to this question in the story? All right, so this one was a tricky one because it's a question word which, but which is like an adjective. It gives more information about a noun. So which what, which storm, okay? I mean, you could hear a question where you could say, you know, which is more important, but then which is, it's acting like a pronoun, and you can't say that question, which is more important, unless you have in the sentence before told us what you're talking about, you know, given us more information. But usually we'll put which in front of a noun, and then we're looking for a choice, this one or this one. We need to pick one. So here for this question, the answer to the question, which storm, is going to be the subject of the sentence. And this is an is question. So we only have the one verb. Is does not need the helping verb. So it's going to be our answer is the deadliest storm, the deadliest storm. All right, so that's our review of that. Now we're going to take a look at telling a story by looking at the picture. And we want to use past tense. So I might need you to help me understand what's going on in this picture, but it looks like here is Pikachu. And it looks like this is, I don't know how to say that, Bulbasaur. And this is Pikachu. So who's this guy?
Squirtle.
All right, so these three guys, Bulbasaur, Squirtle, and Pikachu, are coming to the water. They're going to see something. They're going to jump in. And then, oh, we got Charmander. I don't know how to say that. He looks kind of sad watching them playing and having fun. And this also looks like Charmander. And I don't know if this is the end of the story or not, but I think that he has to make a decision. It looks like he's saying something. So we're going to make up a story, right? And so you get to tell a story about it. But the thing to remember is you want to sound like everything has already finished. Okay, so, you know, you're going to be an author, just like when we read Jigsaw Jones. You know, we have, let's see, then Nick, pushed Daniel into a leaf pile, pushed, ed. Daniel turned, ed, and tackled, ed, Nick around the legs. Naturally, I joined in, joined, ed. That was past tense, probably a mistake. Daniel and Nick were is past tense, stronger than me. Pretty soon I was, past tense, getting the worst of it. And so everything that Jigsaw is doing in this book is written in the past tense. Now, the easiest way to make the past tense is to put ed on the end of the verb. However, when you're talking, you have to remember that there are 3 different ways to make the ed sound. So I'm just going to give you one little tip here. Sometimes the ed makes the sound of a T. sometimes the sound of a D, and sometimes we have to add a syllable, and it kind of sounds like id. Okay, well, I'll tell you how you can tell. You're going to use this one if the verb ends in T or D, because we don't want to say t, t or d, d. So, for example, let's see if we can think of a verb that ends in T or D. I can never think of one when I'm trying to, but let's see. Well, one that comes to mind is to hand something to somebody. You know, so I could say, she handed me the, you know, maybe we're having dinner and I say, can you pass me the salt? And she handed me the salt. So that ends with D. And so when I add ed, I don't want to say handed. So I say handed. I add the id. For one that ends in a T, oh, someone who runs really fast, that's called sprinting. And so, you know, they saw the bus was coming, and so they sprinted toward the bus stop. They ran really fast. Well, we don't want to say sprint, right? So we add the id, sprinted, or handed. So if the verb ends with a T or a D, then when we say the past tense, we're going to add that new syllable id. For most of the other ones, most of the other verbs that use ed, it's either going to make the sound of a T or the sound of a D at the end. And you don't have to worry about it because your mouse will just do it automatically, whichever one is easier. You know, so if I say stopped, well, it's just automatically going to make that T sound. So it's going to go stop, stopped. One with a D would be like, when you had your book reading competition, there was a judge. And so the judge we could say judged the competition. So we'd take the verb to judge something and we would add so the E is already there. And then that would just be a D, judged. And we don't really have to memorize that or remember that because our mouse will just do it automatically by whatever's easiest. And so here we can see with jumped, we don't want to say jumped because what's the last word? What's the last letter of the verb? The verb is jump. Before we add ed, it's jump. Well, let's look at the last letter. Is that a T or a D? No. So we don't need to say jumped. We can just say jumped. Now these three verbs, I'm sure you've learned in school that there's a whole bunch of verbs in English that do not add ed. Okay, and so there's a few that are good ones to remember, like see becomes saw. Oh, like a seesaw. Went used to be go, and was used to be is. A couple of the other ones that I think are pretty good to remember is that eat becomes ate. The verb to be, I remember I talked about the super verb, the super verb is. Well, is has a whole bunch, okay? It depends on who we're talking about. If we're talking about I, then the verb is, we actually say am. If we're talking about you, or we, or they, which is more than one person, then we say are. So we and they are more than one person. If we're talking about one person, like he or she or it or anybody that's just one person that's not you and not me, then we say is. The past tense of these, well, for I, we would say was. And for is, we would also say was. But for are, we would say were. So those are helpful to know. Another one that's kind of helpful to know is if it's I, we would say I have. You, we, and they, we say have. He, she, and it, we say has. But for past tense, everything turns to had. So that one is pretty easy past tense. It's all had. And you've probably learned those, right? Yeah. Okay. I think it's pretty good to know went and saw. So let's look at our story and I'll just maybe talk through it one time and then it's going to be time for us to say so long. So maybe here I would say, remember when you're telling a story, you always want to start out by saying who the characters are and where they are. Okay, so always start your story with who is in it and where are they. So answer those questions, who and where, and maybe when. And then after that, say, what are they doing? Okay, and when you're talking about what they're doing, try to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. If you want to make it exciting, try to have a problem that gets solved at the end. So we could say, and a way to start the story is you could start the story by saying one day. An easy way to start a story is to say one day. You know, fairy tales start with once upon a time. You could start with one day, or you could just start with in the beginning, or in the morning, or in the afternoon, or one day in the morning. So you could say one day, Bulbasaur, Squirtle, and Pikachu saw a pond. Okay, so now we know who it is and where they are. Okay, so
that is not a pond, that is a lake.
Okay, well, a pond and a lake are the same thing, actually. So saw a lake. And then you could say, we wouldn't say they was, because they is more than one person. So we would say they were. They were excited to go swimming, you know, or it was a hot day and they wanted, so I put the ED on the end of want. They wanted to go swimming. They wanted to cool off. You know, you could say the three friends jumped, add the ED, jumped into the water. They had so much fun. Had, not have, had so much fun. They were laughing, not are, but were laughing. And then, you know, you could say, next, Charmander came, not come, but came. Came is the past tense of come. Charmander came. He saw the three friends having fun in the water. He was sad because he is one person, so we say was. He was sad. He wanted to play in the water also. And then if this is the end of the story, you could say finally, or in the end, Charmander decided. Decided means he made a decision. Decide means to make a decision. Now, decide ends with a D. So when we add our ED, we need to say id, decided. In the end, Charmander decided to go swimming also. You know, or whatever you want to say. But just remember that every sentence you say is going to be somebody does something, somebody does something, somebody does something. Okay? Every sentence just start that way. Somebody does something. But you want your does something to be past tense. So it either has to have an ED on the end, or you have to change is to was for one person, are to were for more than one person, see to saw, go to went, want to wanted, jump to jumped, have or has to had, and then you'll be fine. One of the ways to connect all of your sentences into a story is if before you start your sentence, you have kind of a word or a phrase that helps the listener know when is this happening. In the beginning, blah, blah, blah. Next, somebody does something. After that, somebody does something. Finally, somebody does something. Or at the same time, somebody does something. Or then somebody does something. So there are a couple of things you can do at the beginning of your sentence to help people, before you start your sentence, to help people know where does it fit in the story. You know, oh, it's happening next, after that, finally, in the end. Okay? Just remember when you're talking, somebody does something. Okay? And make whatever they're doing past tense. All right? I think you'll be great, and I will send this recording to your mom, and you can tell me on Thursday how it went, okay? All right, so
Okay.
it is time to say so long.
Chip.
Bye, Archie.
Bye-bye.